Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Rutherford. I'm a certified functional medicine practitioner here in Reno, Nevada. I'm also a chiropractor.
Dr. Randall Gates, board certified chiropractic neurologist, also a chiropractor.
Today we're going to talk about balance problems. Consider gluten as the cause. So these are two separate professions that we put together, functional neurology and functional medicine. And we put those together because of, I don't know if it was trial and error, whatever you want to call it, but most people realize that the brain and the nervous system control everything. And in the functional medicine world, we understand that there's a lot of chemistry that plays back to the brain. And we started to realize that if we didn't put the two together, things that we were going to be doing in one area were going to be sabotaged by another area. Turns out that that's been a pretty successful model for us. Balance problems are some of the first problems we started taking care of. We started out with fibromyalgia, but dizziness, vertigo, and balance were our biggies. That was when we started to do most of our talks on those. For a couple of years, we did a lot of talks on those. And it's interesting to see how our understanding from 8 years ago has become more and more and more fine-tuned. And we've talked a lot about dizziness and vertigo and problems and balance problems up until now. I think we might have even touched on this subject before, but this is a cool subject to me because some of the worst cases of balance that have ever walked in here have been gluten caused.
And not diagnosed with that before they came here.
Not diagnosed.
Self-facing, but it's just reality.
Well, no, one of them literally came from one gal came here literally from a research hospital at Notre Dame.
Oh yeah.
And it was, and I'm with stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of lab testing and data and stuff, and she was basically blown off. That's like faking it. And in the first one, it was like 11 or 12 years ago. Remember? And she was having seizures, and she couldn't walk. And she was told by one of our colleagues that she was faking it. So this is kind of a cool topic to me from that perspective. So balance problems, consider gluten as the cause. And unquestionably, this will be one of the easiest, simplest keys to success, which we do for our patients, that you will ever hear. And Dr. Gates is going to cover this pretty thoroughly, probably a pretty short period of time, I'm guessing, on gluten, which when we got into practice was a joke.
Right.
We were the nuts, we were the crazy people, and I think now everybody's pretty much on, honestly everybody, but I mean, gluten is taken a lot more seriously these days as a potential serious allergen, and it's actually a lot more than that. So early research and early experience.
So in neurology, if you had lack of balance, and what I put in the kind of the type section, the blurb for this video, I said if an inner ear disorder has been ruled out,
Yes.
if a sensory disorder has been ruled out from the feet, like peripheral neuropathy, and you still have lack of balance, a lot of you are out there seeing doctors, not getting answers. You're probably told that you have ataxia. We don't know what it is. It may be genetic. It may not be genetic. But lots of times the testing ends there for most patients because testing for genetic ataxias is expensive.
And ataxia is when you find yourself having to walk with kind of a wide base.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the lack of balance. And then, or the immune testing, it's just not commonly employed because these are new findings in the literature, and even though the literature is so strong, it can take 15 years for that information from the scientific literature to get to most neurologists out there in clinical practice. So they maybe change their viewpoint on it. So relative to this, the early research was Dr. Hajivasulu.
Just writing about that in our peripheral.
Okay. Forgive me if I'm butchering his name. He's out of the United Kingdom. Very, very brilliant man in our opinion. And he was the one that really cracked the code on gluten and neurological disorders. And he found that a huge percentage of those with peripheral neuropathy, that's where they have numbness and tingling, burning in their feet, poor balance because they're losing nerve supply in their feet. A third of them, when they're not diabetic, have gluten intolerance neuropathy. And so what happens is, even if most of you are not going to have gastrointestinal symptoms. Let's just get that out there first and foremost. You don't have to have diarrhea to have this. But what does happen is that you can have no GI symptoms. Your immune system attacks gluten when you eat it, from wheat, barley, oats, and rye. It's in everything. And then the immune chemicals to gluten can attack peripheral nerve tissue and kill it, causing peripheral neuropathy. So that was a seminal finding by Dr. Hajivasulu.
Now, just to stop right there. I just absorb what he just said. A third
of the
non-diabetic.
Yeah.
Of the non-diabetic people out there who have peripheral neuropathy, and I say that because some of you who have balance from gluten are going to have this peripheral neuropathy. A third.
Staggering.
Especially
when you consider that there are 80 different causes of peripheral neuropathy, and when someone is diagnosed with peripheral neuropathy, the most common line they receive is, well, half the time it's diabetes, half the time we don't know. So it's important when this other half the time when, quote, we don't know, it's actually gluten. Yeah, a third of the time of that, 50% is gluten. So important. So before that, Dr. Hajivasulu got the idea to do that study. He started observing balance problems in his neurological patients. He's a neurologist. And he started seeing that these balance problems had a high association with gluten antibodies, so immune cells to gluten. And these patients didn't have celiac disease. Celiac disease is where the immune system kills gluten, but it also attacks the gastrointestinal tract in that process. In the last 15 to 17 years, there's been an explosion of information such that 1 out of 100 people will have celiac disease. It's actually way more common than it used to be. But now we're thinking upwards of 10, maybe 15% of the population has this thing called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, where when they eat gluten, they just feel worse. They don't have celiac disease. Their intestines are not being killed by the immune system, but they have brain fog, they have headaches, they have peripheral neuropathy, they have balance problems. The list can go on and on.
I mean, we treat fibromyalgia, peripheral neuropathy, chronic fatigue, dizziness, vertigo, balance, restless-leg syndrome, bad guts, thyroids, whatever it is, and virtually every single person who shows up in here has some degree of sensitivity to gluten. Would that be accurate?
That's accurate. Another thing that we're looking at is the testing for this. So even if you've been tested and told that you're normal, maybe you only had 2 tests run. The new state-of-the-art tests are 20 different markers for the gluten molecule. So there's some, you have to dig a little deeper. That's the best way to say it.
The testing that you're getting is not is not sensitive. In other words, if 100 people go and take like the blood test, 100 people who have gluten sensitivity take the blood test, maybe 50 are going to be told they don't have it. 40 are going to be told they don't have it.
Yeah, it's probably not.
So 60%. I remember it's like 40% accurate or something like that.
Because we've done studies where we run the standard gluten test from LabCorp, and not just even for celiac, just gluten sensitivity. And then we run another panel that has 20 different markers, and it's astounding the difference that you'll see.
So that's a Cyrex Labs test.
Cyrex Array 3.
Cyrex Array 3, and that test, if I remember correctly, is 97% sensitive, right? 96% specific. So it's like very, very good test.
Yeah. So Dr. Hajivasulu started seeing this problem around, I think it was 2002, 2000, somewhere in there, relative to patients with balance issues with ataxia, who had no cause attributed to them. They're just told, we don't know what it is, it's idiopathic, we don't see a family component to your balance problem, so we know it is. He determined that a large percentage of them had gluten problems. So then that fostered a lot of literature. Now we fast forward to 2017, and even though he got beat up voraciously in the scientific world for his, assertions, which is so common as the case for any pioneer in the field. Exactly. Right. Then now we fast forward to 2017, and they just came out with a study from the Sheffield Ataxia Center in the United Kingdom. This is their main balance clinic in the whole UK. And they took 1,500 people, and they do all the testing required. They have whatever it means to do it. When I say whatever it means, I assume they get grants, but they have the money to do the testing that needs to be done, that insurance companies commonly will not pay for. So they found that 25% of these 1,500 people who have balance issues have gluten antibodies alone, causing their lack of balance. And then there were a lot of genetic cases within their sample size or their patient population. But then there are other autoimmune problems that were also associated with the balance issues that you have to factor in. And even some of these horrible disorders like olivopontocerebellar atrophy, things like that, they're finding that they may even have some autoimmune components. So there's some overlap between genetic conditions, what we thought were genetic, and autoimmunity. So that was important. And then Dr. Hadjibasulu just came out with another study. It was a sample size of 700 people. It was a gastroenterology journal, actually, where they were looking at non-celiac gluten sensitivity and balance problems. And they found another huge proportion of them basically have these balance issues and antibodies to the brain, antibodies to the cerebellum. And an even more interesting research article that we attached to today's broadcast that you can see on powerhealthtalk.com was looking at alcoholic patients. And many of you may know that when somebody suffers with chronic alcoholism, they'll develop balance problems. They develop ataxia. And it was long thought that it was due to the lack of absorption of certain nutrients, particularly vitamin B1. And when you have low B1, then your balance center, your cerebellum, gets deprived, especially in the area that controls the legs. And that's why they have balance issues. Well, in this new study, they're finding that 71% of these alcoholic patients had immune inflammation surrounding their cerebellum. So the immune system was attacking their cerebellum. And they saw a huge degree of gluten intolerance in these alcoholic patients. And just so you know, I don't think we explained this early, when you have a gluten reaction in your intestines where the immune system is attacking gluten, it's not necessarily killing your intestines. These immune cells to gluten actually attach on to the balance center and can cause damage and degeneration of that balance center.
Yeah. It even goes way beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty amazing. Like the gluten, I mean, people will come in here and now we've been in practice together now for, this is our 8th year. And so we've been doing this for about 9 or 10 years. And back then it was like, oh, take people off the gluten and there would be these miracles and nobody else was doing it. And we were kind of pounding our chest like, where else? We're like, no, what's going on? But you couldn't believe the things that were going on. It turns out that gluten affects so many things. Like, for example, can attack the thyroid, and then that can attack the cerebellum.
Right, and
these are all new
today.
Yeah, and these are all new studies that he's talking about because I haven't heard about it until now. So I was just wondering if they've done a study on that.
On the thyroid, so that's readily acknowledged now. So we
Okay.
attached to a study from Japan where they took like 60 people with these balance issues.
Oh, that's right.
And they basically found they were measuring for thyroid antibodies because it's now acknowledged that immune cells to the thyroid can cross-react with the cerebellum. Another thing for those of you out there who are thinking, okay, well, maybe I should be tested for gluten. You should also be tested for something called a GAD antibody, capital G, capital A, capital D. It stands for glutamic acid decarboxylase. And these antibodies directly attack the cerebellum as well. And the interesting thing is that the new literature has shown that these GAD antibodies form, guess why? Because of gluten reactions in the intestines and dairy reactions in the intestines. So highly, highly, highly significant. And probably the last piece of data is a new study on multiple sclerosis where they found that the immune cells in the brain actually release a gluten antibody.
Well, we treat MS patients and
Right.
we get them off of gluten. You'll usually see some degree of improvement.
Now, there are more things going on with the MS patient than, for example, gluten ataxia, far more physiologic variables. But those are joint variables. But those are joint
Yeah.
And very interesting, though, because these immune cells are releasing gluten antibodies. So the simple concept is let's get them off of gluten so that they don't make as many of these antibodies of gluten. And you have to keep in mind that, for example, this one antibody we're talking about relative to MS and all of you balance patients is called a tissue transglutaminase 6 antibody, also all the gliadin antibodies. But when you go to your gastroenterologist and you're checked for celiac disease, likely you're getting the tissue transglutaminase 2 antibody, or just a general tissue transglutaminase antibody. And there's the TTG2, there's TTG6, and there are other TTGs. So you really want to have the TTG6 analyzed, and that's where the Cyrex Array 3 is so valuable because it is the best gluten test on the market. So that's the data. It's very exciting because if you don't have a genetic ataxia, a genetic cause your lack of balance, simply also you can say, hey, did anybody in my family have a problem with balance? That's a good place to start. If the answer is no, then you should start considering an autoimmune problem to your lack of balance. That's the point. So we hope this was helpful. Do you have anything else you need to
Yeah,
add?
if you get off the gluten, okay, everybody's gonna have a different reaction. We've had people who've had such severe gluten sensitivity ataxia, they literally could not walk. They were like Gumby. They were doing this. So of course they were examining from all kinds of more well-known neurological issues, and nobody's thinking gluten. So simply, if you get off of gluten, you know, you can look for subtle changes too. There are other things that contribute to balance being off, but you can look for subtle changes or anything all the way up to that significant of a change. But you need to kind of like be attentive to what's going on, because it might be part of your problem. It might be it might be the whole problem. Okay, and so on and so on. So just, you know, if you get off of gluten and you go, oh, you know, maybe my balance got a little bit better, whether it's not that big deal. Maybe pay attention to whether your brain fog cleared up, whether your short-term memory got better, or you're sleeping better, or whether your hair starts growing again because your thyroid. You know, any type of a change I would attribute to that. And I'm saying that because a lot of people will get off of it. That I hear this every day. A lot of people before they come to us. Well, I got off of gluten, and you know, I was off for a year. You know, my brain felt better, and my brain fog went away, and my stomach felt a little bit better, my hair was a little bit better, my energy was a little bit better. But my peripheral neuropathy only got a little bit better, so I started eating again. It's like, just watch for that. Just that's a little bit extra, kind of a clinical pearl, just in general. But I think it's one that would be good to know.
That's a great point, and I want to expand on that. Gluten's the tip of the iceberg, so you may have other food reactions. We mentioned dairy in that one little article that we referenced. It could be a number of things that you're reacting to if you're reacting to gluten alone, or not only gluten alone. And we even attached some reference articles where they found some of these patients with ataxia who had gluten problems. They went on a gluten-free diet. They were so severe they didn't feel better, like Dr. Rutherford is saying. But then they put them on immune therapy with the gluten-free diet, and then they did really good. So what we do here is we would say similar to that, but more of a natural approach. And by doing all of these pieces where we do a lot of gut healing, we restrict all of the person's food allergies until you figure out the last food allergy. You're not going to know if the person's better. All of these different things, and then balance can improve. We didn't even talk about the brain exercises.
It's a wide subject, but we have data. We've been doing these talks for over 2 years now. So
if you have more questions, I would say go and watch anything else we have on powerhealthtalk.com, on vertigo, dizziness, balance.
Right.
In years of these, it'll probably be illuminating relative to these connections. So we appreciate you watching. Hopefully this was helpful, and we'll see you next week for an exciting topic.